Hi, Kunal. Thank you so much for taking time for this interview. I really appreciate you taking time for this. Um,
For having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. As we start, can you talk a little bit about your background, how you got into cybersecurity?
Yeah, so my path has been pretty interesting. So I started my career as a full stack developer. Back in the day, there was no term called full stack, but now there is. But what I mean to say is basically one developer for an application that
Hmm.
included front end, back end, middle tier, everything, um, development, maintenance, um, customer support, everything. So I did that for a bit. And that's where I had my trial by fire from a development perspective. And after that, I went on to being a sysadmin for a little bit, was DBA for a while, did some more development,
Hmm.
um, became moved to QA for a bit, became an architect, and then finally moved to security. So my move to security was not necessarily planned. What happened was I was working in kind of a DevOps role, leading a DevOps team. Wasn't again the term DevOps wasn't vogue at that time. It was mostly what we used to call it as developer experience. And there was discussions going on to have like a bug bounty program, and I was very curious about it because well, I didn't know much about it, I guess. But the idea that was being floated was basically to have, put like a scope out there and say that this is what we would be paying external people who are not employees um, to come and tell us that, hey, your site is riddled with security issues. And I just wanted to understand what the nuances for it. So I kind of volunteered to lead that program.
Hmm.
And this was back in the day before we had the likes of Bugcrowd, HackerOne, the managed bug bounty. So we ended up putting together, a ragtag bug bounty program, and there's a lot of learnings along the way, including something, of course, the technical learnings, but along with learnings on how to handle some of the hackers across the world, how to do the payouts, what are the legal ramifications and things like that. Um, and that got me more and more interested into security because if you started with the bug side, then you want to know more about how do you make sure that those bugs aren't there in the first place. And so that made me basically I got connected into the security community. And one of my peers at the time, he was actually in the security organization, and he was moving over to a different company, and we were just chatting, and I asked him, who's going to take over your role? And he said, why don't you do it? I said, I just laughed it off. There's like, I don't have any background. I don't know much about it. I didn't end up taking that role. I thought he was just joking. But fast forward, I think a year and a half, and there was a position, and I got much more deeper into security. And there was a position that opened up, pretty much same as a security manager. And the hiring manager kind of knew me, and he had worked for me with me, and he offered me this role. I said, yeah, I will grab it with both hands. Um, and that's basically where I moved full time into a security role. And then along the way, have had to work with different professions around security community. And my background, the dev background, and all the other things that I mentioned actually helped me for this role that I currently am in.
I see. I understand. So you kind of started with IT and technology and working with developers and transition cybersecurity. Actually, correct me if I'm wrong. You had experience with kind of financial services space from Credit Karma, if I read
Yeah.
your kind of background right, and PayPal, which is amazing because I think it's the requirements on robustness of the systems and the stakes are high when you're handling money. So I imagine just conceptually, um, something like e-commerce or manufacturing, obviously cybersecurity is important, but if it's financial services, it's way more important, and the requirements and the compliance issues are much more. Uh, the dollar amount attached to them is much higher, which I guess provides a very interesting point of view for someone in your position.
Yeah, absolutely. Fintech or more larger, the financial services has been my stomping grounds.
Mhm.
And it's something that, I take comfort in. Yes, the ramifications are also huge in terms of in case there's a breach and things like that. But then it brings up some interesting challenges, especially if you're in the consumer space, where you have to balance security along with the customer experience. And at the same time, you have the performance concerns as well. Like for example, a company like PayPal, the transaction volume is in, I think I last heard it was in trillions, um, and which is phenomenal. So even a design consideration from a pure performance perspective, a delay of a few microseconds can make or break. And that is when you add on the additional constraint, if that's the way some people like to call it, of security. So it makes for a very interesting design problems that you need to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you can make it fast but full of holes, or you can make it secure but totally unusable. And where this line is, it's not a trivial problem for sure. Um, well, thank you for sharing this insight with us. Kind of switching gears a little bit, as you can imagine, cybersecurity as a function kind of exploded in importance, and it's so much more in the um, top of mind for a lot of executives, corporate executives. And I think as a result, just there are many more roles available, and a lot more younger professionals, more junior roles, are considering either transitioning from one function to another. So from IT to cybersecurity, and also a lot of probably even students are considering cybersecurity as a career path. So from your vantage point, what will be your advice to those junior professionals as they're considering making a career in this space? What would you recommend they focus on?
Yeah, I mean, one easy way to put it is just do it, right? Um, but there are so many courses out there, which can focus purely on cybersecurity. You have master's courses, but then apart from that, there are certifications. There's also online learning and things like that. I think at the end of the day, what matters is, of course, the knowledge that you have helps you get your foot in the door. But what really helps is basically having that curiosity and the thirst for learning, right? The more curious you get, and I can take my own example when I was talking earlier about the bug bounty program. I just curious about how it works, and I guess I was young enough I could say that I felt that it would be very cool to actually interact with some of the hackers, because when you're watching all the movies and all of that, there's a certain amount of awe-inspiring thing that comes up with regards to the talent that some of these guys have to kind of break in and do the damage. But if that power were to be used for good, the potential is endless. With regards to the to the opportunities, I have some numbers here. So as per a research conducted in 2021, there are a total of 3.4 million cybersecurity professionals worldwide. Now, that is a huge number, considering that that wasn't necessarily a career path that was even available maybe a couple of decades back. And this is in addition, I mean, around 700,000 jobs were added last year alone. Even with all of that, there is a huge dearth of cybersecurity professionals. Most of us keep on hiring, and it's if you want to get in, just get in. And there's always going to be learning that's happened, but that's what keeps your job interesting. And there is no end to it, basically.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Makes sense. Again, switching gears a little bit. I know there are certain themes that are top of mind for a lot of CISOs and other cybersecurity executives. And I'll probably ransomware is one, cloud security, but those are the issues that people are focusing on right now. But if you look in the future, I don't know, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, in your view, what do you think will be the top three challenges or concerns that will keep CISOs up at night?
Yeah, definitely. Ransomware is definitely one of the things that is top of the mind for most, um, I guess, organizations, not to say it's just cybersecurity, right? Most board members are now dealing with that. And it's kind of like a pandemic um, of sorts. And all kinds of industries are involved in this, right? Attack, because there might be organizations who are not necessarily IT friendly, and they might be, let's say, for example, not that much invest into tech, just the bare minimum, and they're having to deal with these ransomware attacks. So that's definitely continue to evolve next year or two at least, because it will take some time before you get the legacy systems upgraded and patched and things like that. Security by design is, of course, takes way longer. The second on the list is something that was very prevalent last year, which is basically supply chain security. Things like Log4j, SolarWinds, they're basically black swan events, and they actually cease to be black swan when it happens so often, right? Um, and it's really interesting because all this while we were looking at securing the perimeter, we were looking at securing the code, and that itself is so tough when you're telling your developers do things a certain way, which is basically perceived as slowing down innovation. um, and on top of that, now you have the supply chain where you have to keep talking to your vendors about how the code that they have, which is not in your direct control, but indirectly you're getting impacted because your vendor was infected. That is a really hard challenge, considering that third-party vendor security was always a challenge. So that, I think, is going to be the second on my list. And the third, it's a shared thing. I would say security is one part of it. I would say privacy, with the likes of GDPR, CCPA, NYDFS, and you can keep on naming acronyms, but the list keeps on growing, and the need for governments and organizations to, or even customers for that matter, to be able to securely access the data. And data is money is the motto here, which makes it particularly difficult for not just security professionals but also for engineering, because you need to be able to engineer your data storage in such a way to be able to comply to all of these regulations, or else be faced with maybe legal actions. So I think these three things I would put on the top of the list.
Mhm.
And one of the things that that I keep preaching is basically security is a shared responsibility. So it's not just the cybersecurity's role. Definitely, the cybersecurity team would be showing the light, but it's a shared role, shared responsibility for product development and product management and engineering,
Mhm.
and that's how we can succeed.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And on the last point on the privacy, so do you think some of the, let's say GDPR, do you think somewhat similar rules will be implemented in the US at some point? So do you think the regulatory environment will be more and more stringent as far as personal identifiable information is concerned?
I think so. Not just the US, globally, I think there is a trend towards putting more and more of these legal frameworks. And some places it's going slow, some places it's fast. GDPR was just the tip of the iceberg. And it's actually interesting that, like, I live in California, and California has similar kind of law,
Mhm.
which is a yeah. And imagine the complications that would come up if all 50 states were to put a similar kind of laws, which I don't see why not. If California couldn't do it, why not Missouri, right? And then what would be the design implications? How do we make sure that we are able to label the data, for example, to store it securely? What happens if an individual moves from one state to another? How does that impact the regulatory framework
Yeah,
that we have from one state to another? So I mean, the list is endless.
absolutely. But to your point, I mean, if 50 states all introduce different privacy laws, but they'll be different, a person moving from one state to another will put the burden of compliance on the organization to start treating that particular person's data differently just because they moved from California to Hawaii, for example, or something like this. It makes sense. And the other thing that you mentioned, I think, was really interesting, that sometimes business unit leaders see cybersecurity as a stopping force on the road to innovation, which I think is unfortunate. But I think it's kind of the reality that a lot of organizations are dealing with. And from your perspective, what do you think would make both kind of parties to collaborate, so processes and not just software, but business in general is built with cybersecurity in mind from the ground up? So it's not a layer that you just put on top and hope it works, but it's built from within as a feature in a way that's enabling and not delaying innovation.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen the particularly the cybersecurity industry evolve over the last decade, and the kind of conversations that I had even at at a, let's say, even a first line management level. Initially, it was maybe a decade back. The conversations that I was having is to prioritize security, right? So at that time, what it meant was security was perceived to be a cost center, and which is not revenue generating. So it was a little tricky to get buy-in for some of the initiatives which would help secure the perimeter, if you will, or secure code or whatever you're trying to secure. So that's what the conversation was back in the day, and we were looking at how we can trace back the issues, vulnerabilities that are found, and then try to put associated cost with it, which is a little difficult. But these days, those conversations have become a little easier, where you can directly correlate the cost of a breach, and the examples are endless, right? I mean, every day I hear about some new breach or the other. So I think what's happening is there's a lot more awareness amongst the board. So those conversations are happening, and actually, depending on the organization, the board is asking proactively, saying that, what do we need to do? How much do we need to put in? It also helps if the CISOs have a direct line to the board. And this was not the case 10 years back. At least I wasn't involved in any such discussion.
Absolutely.
And that is happening more and more, where even though the CISO may report to somebody under CEO, or maybe even directly under CEO, they have a direct line to the board, and they are asked to provide a roadmap, a plan, and they're held accountable also. So I think it's a positive thing that we're seeing, and everybody is getting on board. But the more strict we get the processes done, the hackers are also getting very innovative. So it's a continuous battle, I guess.
Absolutely, the efficient frontier. Sounds good. One thing I was curious about, so as you mentioned, it's always an evolving field. Cybersecurity is a concept. So where do you usually learn about new technologies, new challenges, new issues, new threat vectors? There's so many sources of information, conferences, online, peer groups. What's your kind of best go-to source for
I wouldn't actually go to one source. Yeah, it used to be that you read a lot of stuff on the net and publications. Those are there, but a lot of time what ends up happening is there's so much information, and let's say you're looking for something particular. It may need a lot of digging into and research to find out what it is that what is the answer that you're seeking. So I think from my perspective, the peer groups really helps. And being in the industry for a long time, I think one thing I've realized is, if you're facing a challenge at your organization for some particular thing, the chances are pretty high that somebody else is facing the same issue and within the same constraints that they have. It kind of makes sense to, what's the word for it? Join forces and fight the same enemy. So what I mean by that is it can be something as simple as even putting together an open source solution that can be leveraged. That's the basic. But even it can be a culture problem, it can be an awareness problem. And it could be that, one particular individual who's in the community has worked deep in that particular, let's say, technology. um, she can actually give you the quick 3 minute, which will help you put the barrier in place while you do your research, because TikTok, time is ticking.
Absolutely, absolutely, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, another question I had for you, as far as Athenia goes, which is actually what you mentioned is one of the objectives, is to provide this network, kind of vendor-free community for cybersecurity professionals to interact and engage. And again, we're kind of early in our journey, and not everything is working perfectly. But if you were to say, I like Athenia because, how would you finish that? And kind of in the same vein, what are some of the things we can do better, differently, or maybe stop doing?
Yeah, I think I didn't know much about Affinia till till you guys reached out. And for me, what was very catching was what you mentioned, which is the vendor, lack of the vendor, because I'm hit up by vendors like multiple times a day. I've lost count, right? And it's all coming from a good place for the most part, because there are solutions that they're providing, but you still have to be able to dedicate the time to be able to separate the stuff that you need versus the stuff that you don't need. So there might be a problem which is a genuine problem for some organization, but you may have it covered. So or the converse is that you may be looking at, you may not even be aware of a problem that you have, right? So vendors definitely play a role in that. So that not to devalue their stuff, but at the same time, there's also pure engagement with the community, like I mentioned earlier, right? That is my go-to place where I talk to peers and network with them and kind of solve some of the same challenges that we are having. One of the things that you guys do is basically send the CISO wire update. It helps me. I mean, I don't say that I know all the professionals in the world, security professionals, but in a lot of them, a lot of times, you get to know people that you know about, but not exactly, and I see some of that in the CISO wire update that helps, maybe at times reach out, because industry centric, you may not know anybody in that, but it may be that you have worked with somebody in the past, and they became let's say a CISO or a senior level executive in something in your field, and you can always reach out, hey, how are you guys solving the problem? um, so that's one thing. The second thing, and I don't know if you guys do this, but something to do is maybe having a little bit like networking events. Panels are great. I loved being on panels and just listening in, if not on the panel. And then in-person events. I know that the pandemic has kind of had put a stop to all of that, but I think that's opening up. And I recently was at an event, December. I think it was the first event after a long time that I was part of. And it was, the conversations that we had were pretty outstanding. And there's nothing like an in-person discussion, the water cooler discussion, which it'll be hard to get that kind of time with like a half an hour or 40 minutes.
Absolutely. No, those are very valid points. And we certainly plan both virtual and face-to-face events, probably not large scale. Again, we're still kind of gauging interest of our members to convene, but most likely will be kind of private dinners for a dozen or so executives that will be local to a certain city. And we're also, I don't know what your plans are. I mean, you're in California, so, but if you're planning on being at RSA later on this year, we'll plan something around that as well. So it's certainly something kind of top of mind for us. Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, that's great. I do attend some of these events, and yeah, it adds a lot of value.
Absolutely. Kind of last question. So you mentioned how you learn about new areas and you kind of reach out to the network and the people in the industry. But if it's something you've researched the problem, you identify the category, and now you're kind of selecting vendors. How do you usually go about whom to reach out to or whom to select? What kind of sources you go to?
You mean which vendor to
Yeah, for example, whether it's any sort of solution that you've identified the problem, you'll understand kind of the landscape of the solution, what the solution would look like, and it's just a matter of selecting vendors, because some of those categories, it could be dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of vendors who are kind of all theoretically addressing the same need. How do you kind of narrow it down and make a decision?
Yeah, one of the things that I've recently put in place in my current organization is basically putting together, okay, let me take a step back. So basically understanding the problem statement, right? So sometimes we're looking for solutions without understanding the exact problem, right? So it's very important for every member of the team to be able to understand the problem. That sounds very basic, but it's interesting how, people look at things from a different perspective and they see different things. So it's very important to articulate the problem statement and kind of look at it from all different angles. Once you do that, what you would end up doing is basically putting together a set of core requirements that you would be looking to solve. And that essentially is the starting point for any solutions that you're looking at. A lot of times what ends up happening is vendors reach out to you, or you reach out to vendors, and they're trying to sell you their what are their strong points, which is good, but it's actually a reverse process that you need, wherein you know what your excuse me, what your requirements are, and they may be, the vendor in question might be great in some other things, but that is not what you're looking for. What you're looking for is your requirements. So it needs to be absolutely clear in your head what are the requirements, and you can have like a evaluation session, right? So you can have like a questionnaire, let's say a 10 question questionnaire, and depending upon how the answers are given, let's say by 5 vendors, you have like a shortlisting criteria, and then you have like level 1 filtration, level 2, and then finally you can do like a POC demo, and then you can do a POC with, let's say, 1 or 2, and then
I see. Makes sense. So it's kind of very structured and defined process of how you go about it. Interesting. But then I guess the step before, do you rely on, again, kind of peer networks to help narrow it down from hundreds to 15 to invite to take that question? Gartner report.
Yes and no. Yeah, yes and no. So it depends on how much time we have for putting together a solution place. Definitely the peer network helps, but also, there are institutions like Gartner, IANS, you can schedule calls with them. I do listen into some of those things depending upon how much time we have. I have different opinions than other people on how that works, but it's always good to listen. But even before you start the process, you need the requirements clear. That's my
absolutely, and that's probably kind of a good starting point. Well, Kunal, I know we're running up on time. I really appreciate you taking time for this. I think it was amazing, and certainly hope that we will be able to put together those face-to-face events. And if you are planning to attend RSA, we definitely will plan something around that as well. But thank you so much.
Yeah, sounds good. Looking forward to it. Thank you.